As technology continues to advance, we've become capable of creating machines and programs equipped with artificial intelligence that allows them to think and make decisions on their own without the guidance of humans. One famous example of a machine built with artificial intelligence is IBM's Watson, a supercomputer that competed against two human competitors in a trivia game show called Jeopardy! More common examples of artificial intelligence are the various assistant programs, such as Siri and Cortana, that are programmed into our smartphones, tablets, and other devices. A common notion that comes to mind when machines are brought up is their complete lack of emotion when completing tasks or making decisions, as machines do not have the capability of feeling emotions. This means that machines are able to rely solely on objective reason and that emotions have zero influence in the decisions they make. However, is this necessarily better? Is it always better to make a decision that is completely based on reason and detached from emotion? Like many others around me, I am subject to be influenced by my emotions when I make all sorts of decisions, whether they simply get me through my day or make a significant impact on my life. What should I have for lunch? Do I want to hang out with my friends after school? Which college should I attend? All these decisions and more are influenced by the emotions I'm feeling at the time. Because emotions are constantly changing and not always justifiable, people may wonder if decisions that are based on emotion are more beneficial than those based on reason. But would any of these decisions be better if we were to detach ourselves from emotion and only utilize reason? If a decision is influenced by emotion, does that decision become any less valid? With this, we must ask ourselves, is emotion a more valid way of knowing than reason? We will start by first making the claim that emotion is a less valid way of knowing than reason because it interferes with people's ability to correctly interpret the facts they are presented with. One example where this is evident is the fact that there are those that believe that vaccines can lead to autism. Despite there being lots of scientific evidence and plenty of distinguished scientists that say that vaccines are indeed safe and do not cause autism, many people still believe otherwise. Within the natural sciences, knowledge that has been established as shared knowledge has an inherent validity due to the processes involved in producing shared knowledge. In order to have knowledge become shared knowledge within this area of knowledge, any notable ideas or observations must be formed into a hypothesis, which then must be tested numerous times before any results are published. Throughout this process, the hypothesis may change either slightly or drastically in order to better fit with the results of any tests. Once the results have been published, other scientists from across the globe test the hypothesis for themselves to test the validity of the results from the original paper and analyze them using reason. Through this process, the only things that become notable are those that are justifiable and reliable through repeated systematic experiments that are consistently accurate and precise. This is to minimize the impact of any external influence, such as emotion, on the results of the experiment because emotion can cloud an individual's use of reason. While there is plenty of evidence, there are still people that believe that autism can be caused by vaccines because this belief creates fear, a strong emotional response that can lead to faulty thinking. With fear, people will interpret facts according to what they believe, not according to what the facts support. With this, we can conclude that emotion is not a more valid way of knowing than reason in the natural sciences because emotion prevents people from using reason to correctly interpret facts and evidence. In relation to the original example, if one were to completely abandon the influence of emotion, like a machine or program, then he or she would be able to conclude that vaccines do not lead to autism. This is because reason would support such a conclusion. This is because reason would support such a conclusion due to the overwhelming amount of facts and support from scientists that back up this conclusion. The only reason why someone would conclude otherwise is that they were driven by their emotions to have an opinion that goes against those of experts in the medical field, despite not being experts or having any sort of authority themselves. Aside from the natural sciences, emotion can be detrimental to the use of reason in the human sciences as well. An example that is very relevant today is the Islamophobia that is sweeping the United States. In light of the terrorist attacks that have been committed in recent years by radical Islamic groups, many Americans across the country have started acting in a discriminatory and violent manner against innocent Muslims that have no ties to the radical Islamic terrorists or the terrorist attacks. Islam is one of the most popular religions in the world, with more than 1 billion followers worldwide. Those that have committed these acts of terrorism are so few that they make up less than 1% of the total Muslim population. However, many people are making the faulty connection between innocent Muslims and violent terrorists not because of reason, but rather emotion, particularly fear. This fear is merely a product of evolution, as people have become evolved to become afraid of things that may cause harm. If people are afraid of something, then they will avoid it in order to reduce the risk of danger and, therefore, increase the chances of survival. However, this doesn't necessarily apply to the human sciences because it leads to faulty thinking. Since a few individuals have committed acts of terrorism, people have started to associate this fear for Muslim terrorists with Muslims as a whole. This irrational association of terrorism with Muslims is primarily driven by emotion, as reason would dictate that most Muslims in the world are innocent. This leads to the conclusion that emotion is not a more valuable way of knowing than reason in regards to the human sciences. Another perspective on this issue is the fact that the media pays special attention to terrorist attacks. It is practically unheard of to find an article or a news story that focuses on the vast majority of Muslims that don't do anything wrong. Instead, many news organizations focus on the very few that cause trouble because such reports evoke a stronger emotional response from people than focusing on the mundane. Because of this, people never really hear anything about the good Muslims and only hear about the bad ones, thereby thinking that Muslims in general are dangerous individuals. Going back to the original example, if one were to completely detach themselves from emotion and only use reason, similar to a machine, then it would be quite apparent that the vast majority of Muslims in the world are completely innocent and pose no threat to the general population. While there have been a few terrorists that were Muslim, the total amount of Muslim terrorists is so little that they reasonably should not have an impact on the general Muslim population. While emotion is not very applicable to the natural or human sciences in comparison to reason, there are some areas of knowledge where emotion can be a useful way of knowing, even more so than reason. In the arts, emotion becomes much more relevant than reason when examining paintings, plays, literature, and so on. With paintings, the artist tries to elicit emotions from the viewer by utilizing a range of colors, shapes, details, and more. In regards to plays, the playwright attempts to elicit emotion from the audience by utilizing music, character dialogue, etc. With literature, the author uses diction, imagery, figurative language, and so on to evoke emotions from the reader. Such emotional responses would actually be more difficult if one were to rely on analysis and reason, as such was not the intent of the artist, playwright, or author. Simply put, emotion is a more valid way of knowing than reason in the arts because reason is more irrelevant than emotion in this area of knowledge. In relation to the original example, a person that relied heavily on reason, like a machine, would not have the same reaction or impression to a painting, play, or book as a person that utilizes emotion more, simply because such things are created with the intent of inducing an emotional response, not instigating an analysis. In conclusion, the validity of emotion as a way of knowing in comparison to reason is dependent on the area of knowledge in question. Emotion is much less valid than reason in regards to the natural and human sciences due to its tendency to lead to faulty thinking. However, emotion becomes much more relevant than reason in the arts because works of art were never really created with reason in mind. Emotions, however, are what make us human, and as machines are becoming capable of thinking for themselves, our emotional capacity is becoming one of the only things that separates us from machines.